me is the leader of the Green Party, formerly a minister in government, of course, Eamon Ryan. Because, Eamon, we hear of an understanding between the British and Irish governments of the export of energy to the United Kingdom. This is kind of all your birthdays coming through, is it?
Yeah, I'm in favour of this. I think this makes sense. I think this is a huge economic, employment, income and green environmental opportunity for this country. So yeah, I am supportive, and I think we need to get the details right. What was agreed last Thursday between the two governments was just a further step closer to it. They're going to have to do a lot of work over the next year to get the details right in terms of what are the trading arrangements, how do you get benefit for the local community, how do you send it across the Irish Sea, what sort of access rules around that. But if we get that right, this is the potential to be as big a moment in my mind as what happened 50 years ago when Whitaker opened up the country and started trade in things like food and tourism and other things, where we now 50 years later have a huge economic opportunity or a huge economic benefit. If we get this right, we'll look back in 40, 50 years time and think that was a time when we switched our energy to being an income for the country rather than a cost.
Yes, but the pressure will then be on us if the British are buying our energy or anybody else to produce more of it. If we produce more of it, we're going to need more machines to produce it. So we're going to have a landscape dotted with windmills.
No, it depends, I suppose. There are different
Don Quixote to protect us.
There are different perspectives in that, but I don't think we have to have the whole country dotted. I think there's a certain amount we can build on land before then it becomes excessive. At that point, when we've developed some of the interconnections and some of the market trading arrangements, we can also go offshore. Our sea area is 10 times a land area, so in that time, it'll take 10, 20 years for those wind turbines at sea and ocean energy, tidal and wave power to work. We can then feed that into the same grid and sell that on. I think we start by doing a certain amount onshore. It gives us the basic infrastructure, it gives us the basic trading arrangements, and then we go offshore in time, because that's where the real large volume power is available to us.
Just before we talk to somebody else, I knew you were coming in, and I really wanted to ask you this question, because the lovely Ingrid was at a conference in Amsterdam a few weeks ago, and she was buttonholed by one of the German delegates who insisted in telling her how much money he is saving by using solar energy and all this sort of thing, and she came back absolutely motivated by the idea of how much money she could save, but more importantly, and she questioned, the Germans appeared to make it very attractive to convert, and she was wondering, are we doing enough to make it attractive to convert?
Yes, we are. I mean, we have different circumstances in Germany. We have about 50% more wind than they have, so their support system is actually much more generous, but we don't need that sort of support system because the wind power is actually stronger. You look at today, I know today's a very windy day, but today about a third of our power through the day has been produced by wind, about 1,500 gigawatt or megawatts of power, so about a third of our power consistently. We are far windier than any other country in Europe, and that's where the long-term opportunity exists here. It's the same way that Whitaker saw 50 years ago that we had a comparative advantage in growing grass, and we turned that into a dairy industry, the meat industry, and we turned it into an export industry. Similarly, we have a comparative advantage with Britain and Germany and France in wind, and we can turn that into a product which we can sell as an export opportunity for the country. And that's going to take time. It's not easy. You have to get the environmental rules right. You have to get, as I said, community gain so that the local communities are the first people to benefit. But why would we turn our backs on it? Why would we say, oh no, we insist we're going to stick with importing Russian gas? I mean, we currently rely for our energy, and 90% of it comes from imported fossil fuels. Now, that's risky for the country. That doesn't create jobs here. That sends money out of the country. And we have a fundamental strategic question we want to make. Think long term. Do we, instead of wanting it to be in that risky place where we're relying on dirty, expensive and foreign fuels, fossil fuels, or do we want to develop our own power and sell that into a grid in Europe which is going to start integrate together?
Now, before I do go to my next guest, and I hope he forgives me, because I've got a really impassioned text from Patrick in beautiful Bunclody. Wind farms, Eamon, are costly to maintain, and the electricity produced by this method is more expensive. The money could be better spent on energy conservation. Now, here he goes. The Danes, who have the most windmills, have the highest electricity prices in Europe. In Spain, it's a natural disaster. In Germany, they're building coal-fired stations. Holland is slashing all subsidies. Scotland's tourism is being destroyed as magnificent views are lost. Australia is conducting an inquiry into the social and economic impacts of rural wind farms.
Denmark currently has about 20% of its electricity in wind. I met the Danish Energy Minister last year. They're going to 50% in the next 10 years. And they're doing it, they say, because it's an insurance policy. It's insurance against higher fossil fuel, higher gas prices and so on. It is cheaper. Wind power is bringing the price of electricity down in this country. And it's one of the reasons why the UK want to import some of it, because we have very cheap wind power. Globally, you mentioned a number of countries there. Last year, the investment in wind and solar, the two big renewable powers, overtook fossil fuel generation, about 250 billion euros across the world. Now, we could turn our back on it, and one of the reasons that's happening is that the likes of solar power, the price is coming down. It's fallen 60% in the last 3 years, and then the cost of wind is also coming down as we get more used to building it. So we could turn our back on it. We could say, oh no, the last thing we want in Ireland is more investment. The last thing we want to do is to rely on our own power supplies. That would be madness. This makes sense, and that's why the previous government doing it, why this government's doing it, and we need to get it right. We need to get our public behind it, because the biggest constraint, the biggest problem is actually getting planning and getting communities to
and I think the public behind is very important. Andrew Duncan is the Lakelands Windfarm Information Group. Andrew, I've given Eamon Ryan a lot of leeway there to make his point. How do you respond?
I suppose the first thing, George, I better give you some context as to where I am coming from, in case the orders get muddied a wee bit and I'm accused of being an anti-green or something like that. I'm just a representative of a small group of people in Mullingar who found out last October that there was a plan for a wind farm in their community. I listened with interest to your query there in relation to will the Midlands in particular be peppered with wind turbines. Just a little stat that might interest you. At present in England, there's 2,386 turbines. The vast majority of them are an awful lot smaller than what's proposed for the Midlands here. If this project in the Midlands gets the go-ahead, you're looking at almost 2,500 turbines. So if this goes ahead, the entire Midlands is going to be dotted with some of the largest wind turbines in the world. Now, well, I've nothing, and our group has nothing against wind power. We sit on the fence in this. There is a debate there. It's nothing to do with us. We're not focused on it. Our focus is purely and utterly to ensure that appropriate guidelines are implemented to protect residents. You know, there are issues in relation to health and noise, and particularly my background, I'm an auctioneer in Mullingar, in relation to property diminution, which is something that really needs to be looked long and hard at.
There are 2 points, because Yvonne in Galway comes in on text, Eamon Ryan as well, that many of these wind turbines that will be built will essentially be for export only, and there won't necessarily be any kickback to the communities in which they're built. I mean, I'm staggered that they can put the same number of turbines in the Midlands and the whole of Great Britain.
Firstly, one of the benefits from this is it allows us to balance our fuel supply, because wind is variable, it doesn't blow all the time. So one of the long-term benefits is we hook up to the UK, and let's say the UK then hooks up to Norway, because this new cable technology is allowing that possible. What we can do is when the wind's blowing here, we can use it ourselves, and we have a surplus to sell elsewhere. When the wind isn't blowing, then we can turn the power the other way. We can get, let's say, hydropower from Norway or elsewhere, and we can balance our whole system. So there is a real benefit to it. One of the reasons why we look at the Midlands, or why I think the Midlands makes a certain amount of sense, is because we have large areas of old bog which we used in an industrial sort of way, where we cut the bog and now it's cut and it's not been used for anything else. And we have large areas as well, the farmland or grazing. both, in my mind, can be very well suited to wind, where you're not close to that, or not that close to housing, where farming can keep on. If you put a turbine in a dairy farm, it doesn't stop the cows grazing right up to the very foot of it, so you're still using the land. It's just efficient use of our land.
Okay.
And in that sort of landscape in particular, I don't think we'll have 2,000 turbines mentioned there by Ian. I think it's likely in the next 10 years, probably about a third of that. But I think that gives us sufficient volume of power to be able to build the grid, to be able to start on this path towards a really kind of a ramping up, as I said, where we go offshore. If we don't do it now, then we're saying goodbye to the opportunity.
Andrew, a listener suggests that there has been no real consultation with local communities about industrial wind turbines. Would you support that view?
I wouldn't actually support that, George. I'd say that there's actually been zero consultation. This is the issue. And just to pick Eamon up on one or 2 points there, he obviously hasn't checked the data, but Mainstream are proposing 1,666 turbines. Element Power are proposing 750 to 1,000 turbines, which you're getting into 2,500 by my mathematical abilities, which wouldn't be great, but would be still managed to be able to add those basic figures. One of the things that has been completely not followed up on in this particular case is that these turbines were planned originally for England or the UK. They don't want them over there. It's a political hot potato for the Conservative Party. The general public don't want them over there. The Midlands of Ireland is a suitable venue as far as these developers are concerned, because it's in close proximity to bring interconnectors and power cables across a short distance. One fly in the ointment: the wind speeds in the Midlands are very low. Therefore, they have to go very high with these turbines. You're looking at some of the biggest in the world. And while it may not stop the cows grazing, it certainly will have a very negative effect on people's property values if you have a 600-foot turbine 500 metres from their home, which under the current guidelines that are there, it could potentially be the case. You could be looking at 600-foot plus turbines built 500 metres from people's home, which will decimate its property value.
All right, Eamon, could you have a 600-foot turbine built 500 metres from somebody's home?
You may have certain circumstances where they're close to homes, but the experience has been...
Yeah, but it's not your home or my home.
But just if I can make the point, the experience is that half of the applications that have been put in for wind farms have been refused. So half the time we have said no, and most often it would be for that very reason. So I don't think it's particularly likely. If we introduce some of the schemes that the likes of Deputy Willie Penrose and others in the Labour Party are pushing for, where you say a 2-mile exclusion zone, where you can't have any turbine near any house, within 2 miles of any house, the problem there, because we have 40% of our houses dotted around the country, is effectively you're saying no to the whole wind industry. And the problem with that, as I says, it puts us back into the circumstance where that house is then having to heat itself or having to power itself with a fossil fuel system that we don't have control of, and that costs us all hugely dearly into the future. So we do have to get the planning right. We have to be sensitive. We have to be careful on environmental aspects and in terms of local housing. But the experience in my mind is that we've done that reasonably well. On board Panola and the planning authorities have said no half the time.
But you haven't talked. Andrew's point is, and I mean, you haven't talked to anybody about it.
I'm talking to people for the last 10 years.
I know you are, of course, but you're a fanatic. But I mean, and also you're not in power. I mean, the powers that be in now, like, surely for something as huge as this, to dot this tiny island with windmills, needs public consultation.
Well, there will be, nothing is being built next week. And in fact, what we're talking about building stuff probably in about 5 or 6 or 7 years' time, if this all works. I mean, it would have to go through a very detailed and a very extensive public consultation phase. I think within that, we should start using new public consultation processes, the likes of the We the Citizens initiative, where you actually bring communities on a random basis, where you select people from the community, you bring them in, show the different options, make sure we get real community gain, which isn't just, the local football jerseys for the local team, but real long-term sustainable gain, where the local council gets a significant revenue, which funds that community into the future. That can be got right over the next 4, 5, 6 years. It's only then that we start building. But if we don't do it now, if we don't set ourselves in that path, or if we fall on that path, what I'm saying is the cost to the people of the Midlands, the cost to people of the country, is potentially massive, the loss.
All right. Eamon Ryan, leader of the Green Party, and Andrew Duncan, the Lakelands Windfarm Information Group.